You're listening to a DM podcast.
We would like to acknowledge and give thanks to the traditional owners of the land we record this podcast on, the Yagara and Turrbal people,
and their continued connection to the land and waterways on which we meet.
Hello and welcome to Sportish, where we look at life through the lens of sport. My name is Georgie Trickett, and I am so incredibly excited to have the first of our guest hosts in the studio with me today. She has represented Australia at 4 Paralympic Games. She's a 6-time Paralympic gold medal winner, and she is Australia's most decorated female Paralympic athlete of all time. She's with the wide world of sports at the moment. You can see her every Sunday on Channel 9. She's a member of the Paralympics Australia board, and she has recently become an author, a mother and an author all in the same year. Welcome to the podcast, Ellie Cole.
Thank you. You know what that reminded me of when you were reading out all of these facts about me? I felt like I was on a wrapper of like one of those fantail wrappers.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Who is it?
It's Emily. Can you guess?
Gosh, that's making me nostalgic. All of the facts and the idea about fantails.
Oh, it's so good to have you here. Libby and I absolutely loved watching you dominate our screens in 2024. And that really culminated in you taking out the Australian Sports Commission's Media Awards Rising Star, and so well deserved. It was just a delight to see you take us from the trials, the swimming trials that were probably some of the first time my family particularly had experienced trials that included Olympic and Paralympic athletes all in the same meet, and to see the way you were on pool deck, bringing us all these amazing stories and helping us understand the athletes that we were going to send to Paris was just brilliant. And then to see you in Paris, guiding us through the games and the Paralympic Games was just brilliant. So thank you and congratulations on an amazing 2024.
Thank you. I must apologise to your audience. I was on television quite a lot last year. No. But I did enjoy certainly the trials in particular because it was bringing the Paralympic athletes to Australian living rooms for a lot of people for the first time. And I think a lot of the challenges that an audience has when they're watching para sport in particular is really getting their head around the classification system. So to be able to be on camera there and have a microphone and to guide people through what disability certain athletes have, how that might impact them in the water and how that compares to other classifications, I think was really positive for Paralympic swimming. And we've seen Paralympic swimming now become the leading sport in Australia in terms of inclusivity. And it's decisions like that from Channel 9 that might seem small to the people up the top who are making those decisions, but has a massive flow-on effect to our communities in Australia. So I do apologise for the amount of television last year, but I'm definitely not sorry for the information that I force-fed you all.
And I think it was great. My kids in particular were absolutely fascinated at the athleticism of the Paralympic swimmers and what they were able to achieve in their different strokes. And to hear them going and yelling at the screen to go Scooter, go Alexis, like they were as invested in those swimmers as any other swimmers on the screen. And rightly so. I think in those moments you sit there going, of course, why wouldn't they see the sport in a similar way? So it has had a huge impact, and it really continues to have an impact even in the schoolyard. My kids had a child with dwarfism start at their school. She's part of an all abilities Paralympic type swimming squad, and they were like, she's the most incredible swimmer we have ever seen. They were like, she is so fast. They are just in awe of her athleticism. And I think the work that you guys have done at Channel 9 has gone such a long way to creating those sort of environments in schoolyards.
It's been huge, and the impact has been really positive, as you've mentioned. And, when you were talking about that girl that your kids go to school with, dwarfism, there was this girl that I used to swim with called Ellie Cole. She's a UK swimmer with dwarfism as well. And you look at how long her arms and legs are, and then you look at how far the distance per stroke she takes, and you're like, that doesn't make sense. Scientifically, you shouldn't be able to swim that fast. And it just goes to show, I think, that broadcast in sport have gotten it wrong for such a long time, where they think that you want to see the fastest and the strongest and everything that comes with that. But really, it's about seeing athleticism come in many different forms. And I think the way that the Paralympic movement has been embraced on television just goes to show that you want to see somebody do incredible things with their body. It doesn't necessarily have to be the fastest, but it just, has to leave you in awe. And that's what the Paralympics does really well.
Speaking of the Paralympics, we had a huge announcement a couple of weeks ago here in Queensland, which was almost like the relaunch of Brisbane 2032. And we were so excited. Libby and I spoke last week about the overall picture of infrastructure for Brisbane and what it means for the Games. But I am so excited to have someone here who's on the Paralympics Australia board. What did you see out of this announcement a couple of weeks ago that's exciting and that we should have our eye on for the Paralympics in 2032?
I know that there's been lots of discussion around what Brisbane's going to look like. And I would actually love to hear about your opinion on this as well, being someone who is in Queensland, because I'm seeing all of this obviously from New South Wales, and we hosted the Sydney 2000 Paralympic and Olympic Games here. So I've seen the long-term effects and benefits that having, Sydney Olympic Park Aquatic Centre have had. The fact that I'm still using that 25 years later is unbelievable. But there has been some really exciting developments that have recently happened in the Paralympic space in particular. I know when the discussion of venues was happening, there might have been a consideration to renovate the Chandler Aquatic Centre to actually be used as a swimming facility. And I think a lot of people turn their nose up at that because Chandler was actually built for the 1982 Commonwealth Games. So by the time that Brisbane 2032 comes around, that pool will almost be 50 years old. But there's actually been some really incredible discussions that have happened recently. An announcement that's happened recently about the Chandler whole sports precinct, not just the swimming pool, is going to undergo a pretty significant upgrade in terms of accessibility. And it's actually going to house a dedicated Paralympic sports facility. Now, what's really exciting about this is that this is an Australia first announcement to have a Paralympics hub in effect. And what's really exciting about this is that it's going to address a lot of the issues that Paralympic athletes have faced in the past. Obviously, funding is a huge issue that we've had. It's really, really difficult to produce world-class athletes if you don't have the money to do that. But the Australian government have just announced almost a doubling in funding in terms of $55 million that's going to go directly to support athletes that are facing a lot of the barriers that we see. So funding issues have been addressed, and we actually in Paralympics Australia have created this thing called the Paralympic Uplift Program. And what that effectively is it's establishing a Paralympic unit at each of the sport institutes. So Queensland Academy of Sport will have a Paralympic sport unit, Victorian Institute of Sport, NSWIS, all of them. And it's going to address classification, pathways, fit-for-purpose training environments, specialised coaching and performance. But a big part of the Chandler upgrade is actually to house one of these Paralympic units that's going to support up-and-coming Paralympic athletes into Brisbane 2032. What's really, really concerning about the Paralympic space at the moment is that we don't have anyone coming through the pathways because we don't actually have a classification pathway. We don't have a performance pathway for Paralympic athletes. A lot of athletes have to go through a similar experience than what I did in that they have to join an able-bodied training program, which is great in a way, but I'm not a high-needs Paralympic athlete. I don't have high needs disability, so I am able to join an able-bodied program if I want to. But you have all of these athletes in Australia that have high needs disabilities that just can't do that. So this is a really wonderful initiative from Paralympics Australia with support of the government to address a lot of these issues. But yeah, they're going to be really changing the way that Chandler looks and making it accessible, which is going to be extremely expensive. But it's really, really important, I think, especially if you're thinking about the legacy of Brisbane, what that's going to look like. And you can't really host a Paralympic Games if the venues aren't accessible. It would be pretty ironic. So I think it's going to be an amazing Games and make a real statement to our communities in Australia about disability sports.
I think it's incredible, but also I think, well, we should have this. So as much as I look at it and think, wow, I'm also like, well, why am I saying, wow, this should be a baseline expectation in delivering these games? And I think what really shocked me most when I was looking at the information that's come out so far, and obviously we're being drip-fed information and we're sort of learning things as we go along, but there's a definite lack of media coverage about what's happening specifically for the Paralympic athletes and for the Paralympic Games. And I was quite frustrated by that. And I thought, wow, I'm frustrated and I'm an able-bodied person who's able to get my fingers on what information I need. How incredibly frustrating it must continue to be for Paralympic athletes and for these athletes who are trying to move through their sports to not even be able to grasp the information they need to understand what the direction is in their sport.
It's so frustrating. And this is something that I've had a challenge with for my whole swimming career. I mentioned earlier that swimming is actually the leading sports organisation within Australia in terms of inclusivity. We're doing it really well in swimming, but we're probably the only sporting organisation that is doing Paralympic sport justice in the way that it's showcased, the way that it's supported. And that's not to say that it's perfect at swimming, but it's definitely far better than other sports. You know, you look at sports like basketball and athletics, a lot of Paralympic athletes are falling over because they're not getting the right support from their national sporting organisation. So that's the thing, like the Paralympics Australia and the Australian government can give as much support as they want. But the national sporting organisations, you think Rowing Australia, Basketball Australia, all of those sporting organisations need to be able to really put some skin in the game. We have Brisbane 2032 only, how many years? 7 years away. And these athletes aren't actually being supported by their sporting organisations. Like we just saw the athletics recently, Paralympic athletes racing 3 hours before the big events. Why? Like, why is this happening? And if you ask the question why, you won't really get an answer that's going to make you happy. I think a lot of sporting organisations really need to have that buy-in, but need to actually see the benefits of including Paralympic sport. We saw how incredibly beneficial it was to swimming. I don't think swimming will ever run in a way again where it doesn't have Paralympic events integrated into the program, because they've seen the way that the community gets around Paralympic athletes and how positively that actually benefits the brand of Swimming Australia.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, with other sporting organisations, they haven't quite grasped the actual benefits of inclusivity. And I think their approach at the moment would be quite tokenistic. But once you actually dip your big toe in and really see those benefits, there's no way that you would turn your back on them again. And so it's frustrating because you've got to bring the people to the party and then show them what it's all about. But at the moment, they're kind of putting the invitation in their back pocket and saying that's for another day. But like Brisbane 2032 is 7 years away. So when is it going to happen?
No, it needs to be front and centre, because there are so many kids out there that benefit from these programs. There's so many able-bodied kids who just benefit from understanding the differences and the benefits of the differences, and who sit in awe of these athletes and what they're able to achieve. I absolutely think the media needs to make sure this issue is more visible so that we can make sure everyone's staying accountable and putting Paralympics at the forefront of these sporting events.
And I think what really frustrates me about this in particular is I've mentioned before that a lot of people that make the big decisions when it comes to sport in terms of broadcasting or within the sporting organisations, they do see athletes that are the fastest, strongest as the most desirable. But if you think about why we actually have sport in our communities, it's to create a sense of belonging. It's to get people out in their communities, to increase the health benefits of our communities as well. It's not actually to produce world-class athletes. That's not why we encourage sports within our communities. It just happens to be that a couple of those amazing athletes end up going on to an Olympic or Paralympic Games. But the real reason why we actually play sport, why we get our kids into sport, is for all of these other benefits that it entails. And if you showcase diversity, women's sport, people of different cultural backgrounds playing sport, people with disabilities playing sport, people watch that and they think sport is for everyone. If they can do it, I can do it. And that's the whole reason why we want to be able to show that anyone can play sport. You don't have to play sport to become a world champion. I think that's where we're really getting that messaging wrong.
I love that, Ellie. I couldn't have put it better myself. And I think the parallel you make to women's sport is really true. Like you see, you make it visible, you put the effort in, you lift it up, and people watch it. It's a product that people love to watch. And my God, maybe it's because 50% of the population see themselves reflected on the screen.
Exactly. And I think that it's so much more relatable. Like I remember watching AFLW for the first time. A lot of these athletes were mums, have just come back from maternity leave and were being really honest and vulnerable about how hard it was. And it was really relatable. And I always say I actually think Paralympic sport is much more relatable than Olympic sport, because Olympians are all genetically gifted in some kind of way. Paralympians, we aren't. We've just come across some massive adversity and we've gone through the other side, and everyone is going to face that kind of, maybe not disability, but a huge adversity in their life. And they'll look to Paralympians for inspiration. Obviously, Olympians do have adversities as well, but I think that Paralympic athletes are really relatable in that sense. And that's why people watch Paralympic sport, watch women's sport, because it is so much more relatable than watching someone who was born with 90% fast twitch muscle fibers racing down an athletics track.
Take that, Libby Trickett. Ellie, this next story I saw and I immediately thought I need to ask a Paralympian or an Olympian about their thoughts on this, because as an everyday athlete, I have some thoughts, but I have no doubt the elite also have a perspective on this. And the article was, people doing intense exercise experience time warp, a study finds. So this was an article in The Guardian that came out. They did a study of people doing 4K cycling, which immediately just says to me, so boring, no wonder.
Is that a long way, 4Ks?
Not particularly, not for cycling, but cycling is just so boring. As I find it so boring. I know there are many people out there who are obsessed with cycling. It is not my sport. But they found that adults who took part in 4-kilometre cycling trials on exercise bikes perceived time to have slowed down, with the cyclists overestimating how long they had been pedalling for by about 10%. People perceive time as moving more slowly during exercise, said Andrew Edwards, a professor of psychology at Canterbury Christchurch University in Kent. The distortion may affect pacing and the enjoyment of physical activity.
So I want to hear your thoughts first, because firstly, sitting on an exercise bike is probably the most boring thing you can do.
I mean, that's my version of hell. I would do anything else rather than sit on an exercise bike every day of the week.
Jogging, I can't run, so I'm genuinely curious. Wouldn't jogging be worse because then you have gravity and nothing to look at?
So I love running. I don't love running on a treadmill, but I love it because I find I get into this flow zone state where I'm just in another world. I lose track of time when I'm in that point, but I also refuse to do it on a treadmill.
What do you think makes you lose track of time when you're running? What part of it?
Well, I'm either listening to music. I find if I listen to music, I really lose track of time. I think it's activating something else in my brain that doesn't have that sort of overt consciousness happening. So definitely music puts me in a different space. I can only listen to a podcast for so long and then I become too aware of what's happening. But I also think you're outside, so you're getting different feedback. You know, you're looking at trees, you're looking at the sky, you're looking at houses. It's lots of things feeding in to distract you from what's going on. But definitely, I've been trying lately to walk with my dog, but without any podcast, without any music, and just be more present. And I find that I do lose track of my time in a good way.
That sounds lovely.
Yeah, it's just really, but I don't feel that if I get on an exercise bike or if I get on a treadmill, I am acutely aware of every step, every pedal, every minute. It just feels like forever.
I think it's because it's quite forced as well. I'd be interested to hear what the listeners have to say about this, but I could relate quite heavily to this because in swimming, whilst it's not cycling, you're looking at nothing. Like you're looking at a black line and that's it. And when Libby or myself were training for Olympics or Paralympics, it's really intense. So it's very uncomfortable. And this article that discusses this, that had done a study, they actually say that it's more linked to the time perception's more linked to high intensity. So exercise making the body feel more aware of pain. And I actually have this theory when it comes to things like this, because my life has felt like it's gone by so quickly. But when Felix was born a year ago, this has been the slowest year of my life. And I'm not saying this in a bad way. Like it's been a good slow, and I've enjoyed that it's slowed down because everyone says it goes quickly, but for me, it hasn't. And I actually did a bit of reading on this. Like, why does my life feel like it's going by so slowly? Like last year was the longest year of my life.
Really?
And then I actually came across this podcast called The Science of Slowing Down Time. So it's all about this time warp that you're discussing right now with exercise. And what it says is that as we go through our life, we're obviously bombarded with all of this stimulus all of the time. And for our body to get from morning to night with preserving as much energy as it can for our brain function, it almost goes on autopilot. So you'll notice that things that you do quite a lot, you go on autopilot. So last year being a big year for me, we had our first son, went to the Olympics, I went on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. All of these experiences that I've never had before. I was exhausted because I was dedicating a lot of my emotional energy to all of these new experiences, and it was slowing down time for me.
Because none of it was on autopilot for you. They were all challenges.
Yeah. So my theory with this article here is that if you're sitting on an exercise bike and you go at quite a high intensity, any kind of exercise actually, it's an experience that you don't usually have throughout your day. And so you're thinking about how your body's feeling. Oh my gosh, this hurts so much. And you get so absorbed into this feeling that it feels like it goes for longer. So that's what my theory is with this article.
So true. So it all goes back to Einstein's theory of relativity, where if he sort of used the analogy of where if you're sitting and talking to a beautiful girl who you're attracted to for 2 hours, time goes like that. But if you're sitting with your backside on a hot stove, time feels like it's taking forever. So it's your perspective that you put around time. And so if it's new stuff and it's challenging stuff, then it will feel hard because that is your perspective of it. And hard means this is taking a goddamn long, long time.
And we don't make our bodies uncomfortable for 99% of the day. So I think that's where the difference is with this article. And I cannot believe that they've dedicated an entire study to this, because I could have just told them that.
I got to the end of the article, I'm like, this is news? And the news was that they'd finally demonstrated it in exercise. I was like, and that's news? Because exercise is this domain where you are constantly challenging yourself and pushing yourself. And I feel like you could have done like verbal study of any athletes and they could have told you what the last, because for you, in the last 15 meters of a race, does that feel like it takes forever?
Oh my gosh, that feels like time stops. In fact, I will never forget the last race I ever did for Australia. It was at the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. I knew it was my last one, so I was like, I'm just going to fang the first 50. I don't know why I made this mistake. I've made it so many times in my career. I'm going to fang it and I'm just going to hold on. Like, I'm going to be able to do that. Last 15 meters, Billy Joel was playing the piano hard on my back. I like almost couldn't move. And I'll never forget seeing like everybody else swim over the top of me. And it honestly felt like time had stopped. Like they pressed pause and I could just see it. It felt like 300 meters, I swear to you.
Where did you finish?
5th.
Oh, Ellie.
Not too bad. I'm pretty happy with that. But I will never forget like that time, that last 15 meters, honestly feeling like 300. And the first 75 meters, 85 meters, feeling like it went by so quickly. But it was the pain. It's the intensity. So I understand where this article is coming from. I understand why they wanted to study it as well, because of course everyone has this question, why does this happen? We need an answer that's scientific, but really we could have just told you that. But then I guess that they probably wanted like qualitative data and all of this stuff.
It was being very sciencey. I have to tell you, you've recently put out a book. It's called Felix and His Fantastic Friends. And I was lucky enough to be sent a copy, and I had said to you, I'm going to read this to my 7-year-old, but I guarantee you, as I read it, my older girls will come over and be interested. And I kid you not, that is exactly what happened. So this,
you know your kids well.
Yeah, I do actually. Well, and I know storybooks well, because a picture book, it has such a place in your memory. It evokes so much feeling that you pull out a picture book, and even if a kid is well past a picture book, they still will like to go back and have a look at it because it takes them back to that feeling of being little and brings back all those memories. And sure enough, they all came to listen to the story of Felix and his fantastic friends. And I had thought, how will this go with the older kids? They were the ones who were still sitting there at the end of the book asking me about all the different characters. So I can't thank you enough for creating a book like that, because it obviously highlighted a bit of a gap that my kids had and some questions that they wanted to ask. What was it that prompted you to write this book, this beautiful book?
That's really nice to hear everything you've just said about the book as well. But the thing that prompted me to write about this book is when I was in the jungle last year for that reality television show. I was talking to one of my campmates and I said to her that I was really scared that Felix was going to go to school one day and he's going to be maybe teased, firstly, by the fact that he has 2 mums, which apparently I'm really out of touch with that. Apparently that's really normal now. Also with the fact that his mum has a disability and his mum is missing a leg. And I think that fear came from one of my other Paralympic teammates. She's an arm amputee, and her child actually was being bullied at school because her mum had one arm. And so we both went into the school together with our Paralympic medals and showed them our relay races that we've done together. And the kids were in awe of the athleticism of Paralympic athletes that we were showing them, and their whole idea of disability completely changed. And so I did have that genuine fear that maybe something like that was going to happen to Felix. And I kind of wanted to address that before he even went to school. and to start making a bit of a cultural shift in the way that we perceive disabilities to the youngest people that we can, because at the end of the day, kids are so impressionable and they're so curious and they do have a lot of questions, but sometimes they are afraid to ask those questions. And so it gave me this inspiration to write Felix and his fantastic friends. But I actually wanted the main character of the book to be able-bodied, because every book that there is about disability that I've seen in children's books, all of the kids have a disability and the target market are the kids that have a disability to show them how amazing they can be. But I actually wanted to show that to the able-bodied community, as well as the kids with disabilities, about what it means to be a friend to someone who's different to you and the things that you can learn when you play with someone who's different to you. And so that's what inspired me to write the book.
I mean, that just gives me goosebumps hearing you say that, because the way you talk about that feeling that you had of how your child would be perceived in the playground, every parent has that fear on some level about what will go on in a playground and how they will integrate and what it'll look like. And that book that you've written, what I think it did so amazingly and what I saw my kids doing was understanding and having a framework around how to ask questions and how to be inclusive in what that looks like. And actually to realize that so many of the things they already do, that is how you would talk to a child with a disability. It actually resonated so much because it was like explaining how they talk to their friends in the playground anyway, and sort of dialing down that idea that difference means that you have to interact in a really different way, that actually play is play and you can find ways to play with different people. It's all just about understanding how they like to play, and sometimes how they like to play is informed by a disability, but actually that makes the play really interesting.
Yeah, it does. And that's the thing, though, is that everybody does play differently. Even if you have two kids playing side by side who are able-bodied, both of those children are going to play a little bit differently based on the way that they were brought up or what their personality traits are. So it's really about addressing those really early interactions and making them positive with the kids, but really embracing the differences that they have with each other. I think a lot of books that I've been reading about kids are about how we are the same. Even though we have differences, there are similarities. But I actually wanted this book really to point out the differences and then to embrace those differences and not shy away from them. It's really addressing the elephant in the room. But I think I'd never had a book like this when I was growing up. I was really fortunate to have a nice upbringing with my school, because my school gave me a nice platform to be able to have kids ask questions and really did address the elephant in the room. But I really wanted kids to all understand that every single story, every single child, no matter what their background is, even if it's cultural differences, it all matters. And it's the parts of us that are really different that make the world so colourful, which is why I've put in a lot of rainbows. I think a lot of people think I put a lot of rainbows in this book because Felix has two mums. But it actually really worked well both ways. But I realised that after the fact. But I just want every child to, it's a little bit of a reminder to know that they belong exactly as they are, and they don't need to go into the playground and assimilate to the world around them. They need to be exactly who they are and celebrate themselves, but also encourage a playground environment where they celebrate each other for their differences as well.
It's something I certainly wish we'd had earlier, because I think it would have helped me as a parent better equip them in a schoolyard, and for me to have the confidence of how to deal with those situations, because as adults, you don't want to put a foot wrong. Like, you're very conscious of not making the situation for a kid with a disability any worse. And you're sitting there going, I don't want to draw attention to this. Should my children ask questions? Is that inappropriate? And I really felt in reading the book that I had a better understanding as well of what was appropriate in terms of how to interact, because kids are interested. And also for the kid with the disability, that is part of who they are.
Yes. And I think our generation in particular, we're not very disability confident. Even myself, I have a disability, and I'll share a little story with you. I met this girl who was maybe 10 years old about 6 months ago, and she was an arm amputee, and I referred to her as an amputee, and she's like, oh no, I have a limb difference. And I was like, I can't even keep up with this lingo, and I've got exactly the same disability as she does. And I was like, how is the rest of the world supposed to keep up with this? And so I found myself flustering, and I live with a disability. So I understand that not everyone is as confident around disabilities as they want to be, but I just want to remind everybody that I'm not even at that point. But this book is really important because our generation wasn't brought up with disability exposure or confidence. It is a really important book for parents to sit down with their kids and say, hi, I'm not familiar with this topic. I am afraid of saying the wrong thing, so let's learn about this together. And I think showing that vulnerability to say to your children that I'm not familiar with this, but I'm curious to learn more is a really, really important takeaway for your children, because there are going to be so many different cultural backgrounds, topics from people from underrepresented groups that they're not going to be familiar with it throughout their lifetime. But for them to be able to acknowledge that, but to say, I'm curious and want to learn more and show that good intention, that's a lesson in itself.
Absolutely. It is an absolutely beautiful book. It is available in all bookstores, Ellie. Where can we get it?
It is available in a few different bookstores. So you'll mostly find it in Kmart and Target. You can also find it on Amazon, and it's on a few different other book websites online. But I would say that your best bet's probably to go to Kmart. Yes.
Where we spend so much of our money in $7 increments.
Oh, we'll just say they've priced it very well at Kmart.
I can't thank you enough for creating such a great resource. Like I said, it landed with all my kids. It'll be something that I'll be buying as birthday presents throughout the year. And it's certainly a resource that I would hope schools go out and put into their libraries, because it adds so much beautiful colour and conversation around this topic.
Interesting that you say that. My older sister is a primary school teacher and she loves the book. So she's actually been writing up some lesson plans for her kids so that we can link it on the Scholastic website and teachers can go and download already made lesson plans, and takes a lot of the backbreaking work away from our already overworked teachers so that they can take this, read the lesson plan and put it straight into action, which is nice.
Anything we can do to help the teachers in the classroom, because we appreciate them very much for having our children for so many weeks of the year.
I'm not at that stage yet, but I already appreciate teachers, and I definitely will much more when I send Felix off to school.
Ellie Cole, thank you so much for joining us today and being a host on Sportish. We very much appreciate your help while Liv's on maternity leave, and we would love you to come back anytime. We want to make sure we're showcasing as many Paralympic and disability stories as we can to make the sports conversation around Australia far more inclusive than it is. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, guys. I loved it.